Jean Paul.
Thank you. Background noise is not too much.
Okay, well, good afternoon to everyone here. Welcome to Together Women Rise, this book club event. I'm Gail Burchard, and I'm a volunteer on Rise's book club committee and the leader of a Rise chapter in Peacedale, Rhode Island. I'll be your moderator for this event, along with Vicki Bush-Joseph, another volunteer of Rise's book club committee. And also, Vicki is a member of Rise's board of directors. We are very pleased to have all of you here today for what I know will be a fascinating discussion on the book Radical Inclusion. Here it is, if you haven't seen it. 7 Steps to Help You Create a More Just Workplace, Home and World by David Moinina Sengeh. Before we get started, we have a lot of people joining us today, so here are a few Zoom instructions that will make sure everyone enjoys today's program. Regarding the mute or unmute, just please leave, say unmuted at all times during our presentation. On the chat, you may enter where you are from, and this is where we will share links, questions for discussion later on. Closed captioning has been enabled for this meeting, so please turn this on if you like in your Zoom toolbar. We have members, guests, and others who may be completely new to Together Women Rise in attendance. All are welcome. Together Women Rise, sometimes known as RISE, is a powerful community of women and allies that have been dedicated to achieving global gender equality for the past 20 years. We have hundreds of local chapters across the U.S. where members learn about gender equality issues, give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries, and build community to forge meaningful connections with each other and with women and girls around the world. Our book club is another way to engage in our mission to learn about global gender equality issues and to experience community with others who care about making the world a better place for women and girls. For more information on our book club and how to get involved with Together Women Rise, please visit our website at togetherwomenrise.org. I'm now going to turn this over to Vicki for our conversation with today's guest speaker. Vicki is going to lead this conversation, and then our guest speaker will answer a few of your questions. If you have any questions you'd like to put in the chat, go ahead, and they will be dispersed as we continue on with our breakout groups or while Vicki's doing the interview. Thank you.
Great, Gail. Thank you very much. So we are going to start with our interview with Jean Paul, but we do encourage everybody to stay for the breakout groups at the end. Even if you haven't read the book, it's a great chance to meet other members of Together Women Rise from all over the country and talk about what brought you to this event, what you may have learned today, the importance of girls' education. There's lots of things to talk about, even if you haven't read the book. So we're so pleased to have Jean Paul Murunga with us today as our guest speaker. Jean Paul is the program officer with the End Sexual Violence Program at Equality Now. And Equality Now is one of Together Women Rise's transformation partners. We have featured grantees that work on specific programs. As we were talking about earlier, some of us just got back from a trip to Malawi where we visited some of our grantee partners in Malawi, and it was everything from a girls' education program to after-school leadership programs to menstrual education and supplies. Those are our grantee partners that work on specific programs. Our transformation partners are meant to address some of the root causes of gender equality or inequality. And we are very fortunate to be pairing with Equality Now in 2023 and 2024 to advance their work And Jean Paul is going to help us understand a little bit better what some of that is and how it ties into our book. It turns out that one of the avenues they use is the power of law. So Equality Now uses the power of law to create enduring equality for women and girls everywhere. Equality Now has directly involved in the efforts to overturn laws that ban pregnant girls from attending school, which is the focus of our book. So our speaker, Jean Paul, joined Equality Now in January of 2016. He has 16 years of experience in human rights, gender, and child protection advocacy and litigation in Africa. Prior to joining Equality Now, he served for 4 years as a program officer for child protection and community development at the Lutheran World Federation Department for World Service in Djibouti. He also managed weekly legal aid clinics at the Kenya Human Rights Commission and the Refugee Consortium of Kenya, offering legal aid and advice to victims and survivors of human rights violations in Kenya. Jean Paul holds a master's degree in project planning and management, a postgraduate diploma in practice of law, a Bachelor of Laws degree with honors, and a diploma in French language studies. He has also undertaken in-service certificate training in women's rights, children's rights, gender justice, the multi-sectoral approach, and information and communication technology. Jean Paul wants his daughter, his mother, his wife, his sisters, and every woman in his life to live in a just society where they are treated with dignity. We're very grateful to have him with us today. As Gail mentioned, I'm a Together Women Rise board member. I'm also a retired lawyer, but I have the utmost respect for human rights lawyers like Jean Paul, and I'm really interested in learning from him today. But first, Jean Paul, if you don't mind, could you tell us what brought you to this work? How did you end up working in this field?
I think we have a connectivity problem. I think he had to drop off. So hopefully he will be jumping back on very shortly.
All right.
He is joining us from Africa, and so there are sometimes challenges with internet. Amy, I hate to do this to you, but so we also have with us Amy Hutchinson from Equality Now. So maybe while Jean Paul is getting reconnected, Amy could jump in, Vicki.
Sure. Amy, if you don't mind telling us, you're part of Equality Now as well, and we're joining us just as our backup, and unfortunately we do have to tap you. So, but if you don't mind, just tell us generally about the work that Equality Now is doing to try to change laws and the difference it's making.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've spoken with many of you.
Oh, I think Jean Paul's back.
Safe as well.
Not in Nairobi. I've just finished a meeting in Tanzania, so I'm here. And the network is not very stable. I'm sorry for that. It went off, and I'm not sure how long it will stay on in the hotel here. So I don't know. Wendy, I lost you at the point where you are reading my bio. I don't know where to start.
I'll help you here. We can appreciate this, having just gotten back from Malawi, where connectivity was really spotty as well. But that is one of the questions. Where are you and what time is it?
Yes, I am in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. It is now 7 p.m., 15 minutes, 7:15 p.m. And I've just finished a meeting on re-entry where we are also fighting for girls to go back to school after pregnancy and childbirth. So yeah, what a coincidence. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. That ties right in, and we appreciate your perseverance and being with us tonight. And normally for those who have tuned into other of our gatherings, we typically do this in the evening, but because Jean Paul is in, as it turns out, Tanzania, but normally you work in Kenya, correct?
Yes, I'm normally based in Nairobi, but unfortunately at this time of the year, we are trying to finish the work for this year. And here in Tanzania, we are pushing for the law to be changed so that girls can go back to school after childbirth.
So let's jump to that. What before we lose you again, what is the current status in Tanzania? Our book was based on Sierra Leone, and you guys were involved in helping change that law there. What is the current status in Tanzania, and what are you doing there?
Great. So the current status is that there is a law in place that prevents girls from going to school the moment you are detected to be pregnant or you give birth. So there's a procedure where at every beginning of the term, the teachers will check girls basically by touching their tummy, which is really sad to find out whether they are pregnant. And it is a very sad form of testing. And this has been challenged at the African Committee. And that's why now we are here to implement a decision that has basically said that this is a violation and should be stopped, and also that law should be repealed. So we are here to meet with the CSOs. We've just finished the meeting, and now we are in the open area here. And we've agreed that with the communicator that we have developed, which is basically a common position, that really this is a violation, and therefore these girls need to access their education. So we are meeting the government next week. So this was to help us consolidate our position, so that when we are meeting the government, we have a common position and what we are proposing, the solution. So we have a policy draft, which is a solution we are proposing to the government next week.
And who, when you say we, who is part of this coalition that you're meeting with the government next week?
Yes, so we have ourselves, and then we have a Tanzania Women's Lawyers Association, which is an association of women lawyers in Tanzania. We have all organizations working on children's rights, on women's rights, because this is an issue that unfortunately it only affected girls because the boys will be allowed to go back to school even after impregnating a girl, which is really a gender equality issue. So we are here over 30 CSOs who we've just met, and with that common position that we are all signing on to, we are proposing solutions. So for example, one of the key propositions we are making is that education should be free for children. Being a girl or a boy, they should be allowed unimpinged access to education. So for example, for girls being denied because they are pregnant, that is a violation. So they should be allowed a period if they want to go and give birth, then that should happen, and then they should be allowed to come back. So we've had cases where when they exit school to go and give birth, they do not come back and the teachers do not accept them back. We've also had situations where they detect pregnancies and they want to use safe means to abort the pregnancies because they don't want the baby or their parents have guided them, then there are no services accessible to that effect. So there are some of the issues also we are addressing, that in the event that this girl doesn't want to keep this pregnancy because it is a violation, probably it was not from her boyfriend or it was something that happened forcefully and violative. She did not consent to the sexual act. There should be options under the Maputo Protocol for safe abortion in those cases. Unfortunately, most of the countries have made a reservation on that Article 14 that they are not allowing that to happen. The sexual reproductive health of these girls, they're not allowing that. So those are some of the things also we are pushing for.
It's having just read about the changing of the law in Sierra Leone, I think it's just taking me aback and probably some of the rest of us that this is still a law that's existing in Tanzania. And how many other countries currently have laws that prevent pregnant girls from going to school in Africa, which is obviously a huge continent in a lot of countries. But what are you seeing?
Yeah, so what we are seeing is that while these expulsion provisions are not explicitly provided for in the laws and policies, they are implemented silently so that they are not in the written law book.
Oh dear.
I think while he's on pause, I'll just go ahead and finish that. In many places, it's not necessarily written in the law that pregnant girls aren't able to go to school or aren't allowed to go back to school. A lot of times, it is the schools in those communities making those decisions, and so and without a law that specifically says you can't, you're not allowed to expel pregnant girls from school. what has happened instead is there's really no protections against that kind of thing. Now, in some places there are outright school bans. And I know Sierra Leone is what you read about, and I am hopeful that Jean Paul can get back on and tell you a little bit about that fight and how we managed to get that changed. But I can't say across Africa where this is an issue, for every country, but basically where we've been most engaged is in Sierra Leone, in Tanzania, and in Zambia. And so Tanzania would be a really big win. And that's not to say that the work in Sierra Leone is necessarily completely finished. Once you are able to get the right laws in place or the wrong laws out of place, then there's a lot of educating communities about it, a lot of challenging schools that still might be trying to do this practice. And so the work continues, even though the law has changed in many cases.
Absolutely. And we've seen that in the United States as well. And obviously in other places, you can change the law. It's aspirational. It's at least a foundation for change, but then, and the author of our book talked about that as well, the minister, about how even once the law was changed, he knew the work was just beginning. And so I would be curious to know how it has been implemented and the changes hopefully that are taking place. Amy, can you talk generally about kind of bigger picture? I mean, I think we kind of take for granted that girls should be in school, but why? What is the importance of girls' education? Why do we want to keep them in school, especially secondary school? And I do think that we take for granted because, the majority of kids in the United States are going to finish high school, but that is not true in other parts of the world. So
Yeah.
Can we look at the big picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides just the equality and justice issue of women should be enabled to participate in school, there are so many things that kind of follow from not being able to be in school, right? So if you want economic inclusion, women's economic inclusion, and you want women to have agency in their lives, then the ability to, have employment and all of that is really, really important. And so there's just tremendous knock-on effects. We also know that when women and girls when girls can't stay in school, they tend to get married earlier. And so the issue of child marriage is actually something that's very hand in glove with this, because if child marriage is legal somewhere where people can be prevented from going in school for pregnancy and everything like that, then automatically that eclipses that girl's educational opportunities. But to go even wider than just what it means for one specific woman to be able to have an education, I mean, I think what we know and what the World Bank will say and what the UN will say is that having women's full social, political, and economic inclusion is essential in creating more peaceful, sustainable, and just societies. Women need to be part of peace processes. Women need to be part of within government. Women need to be in all of the places where these decisions that impact their lives are made. And so, you're not just necessarily eclipsing one person's economic opportunities, for example. You're not creating the conditions where women can succeed and lead. And that's really to everybody's detriment.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the statistics that floored me from our book was Sierra Leone's literacy rate, which is less than 40% overall. And in rural areas for adult rural women was less than 10%. So unless you can keep girls in school, that's affecting literacy rates, which affect all the other things that you were talking about. And we saw this in Malawi as well on our visit, and I'm sure Beverly and then we'll see it in Cambodia. The longer you can keep a girl in school, then she will get married later, she'll have children later. You've got all the health benefits of having children later when the body's more physically fit for that. We've funded fistula programs that are oftentimes caused by early pregnancy, by young girls getting pregnant. So if we can change the reasons why girls, get pregnant. So can you talk?
And I would actually just add to that in no small, I mean, like, I'm not going to speculate as to how pervasive it is, but sometimes these pregnancies are actually the result of sexual assault in schools. And so it's a bit of insult to injury, because all of a sudden the school is not a safe place. And then once you become a victim of that, then you are expelled from it, and with longstanding life consequences. And really quickly, somebody did ask earlier about how long this policy has been in place in Tanzania. I believe it was 1961. So that this policy has been happening there.
Okay, thank you so much for pinch hitting, Amy. It looks like maybe we do have Jean Paul back. Great, lovely. So we'll see how long we can keep this going. So Jean Paul, could you talk about, we're talking kind of bigger picture kind of things. What are some of the reasons behind teenage pregnancy?
Yeah, so some of the drivers of the teenage pregnancies is, of course, exploitation of these young girls, because this is a low-income country, both Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and, of course, many other African countries. So these girls do not get necessities in their lives. And in some cases, unfortunately, it's the parents and guardians who push them into the exploitation, that you are now a grown-up girl. So whenever a girl reaches teenager, they see her as ripe for, quote-unquote, sexual activity or marriage. But it is more about exploitation. So these are some of the factors that are behind all this. And of course, with the inadequate access to sexual reproductive health, both services and also products, so that things like even family planning are very, very low in terms of absorption and reach and access, even clinics. So then all these contribute to this whole problem where girls end up pregnant and they can't address it, and therefore they have to give birth, and therefore they have to be expelled from school because you have an anti-discriminative policy. So yeah, these are some of the things that contribute to the whole issue of child pregnancy, basically. Yeah.
And it reinforces, the programs that we have supported, where there's education about reproduction in schools. There's girls' leadership programs during and after school, so they can learn how to assert their rights and say no. The lack of access to family planning and modern contraception are some of the things that some of our grantee partners do try to address. So that's important to know the underlying causes. So in terms of, one of the criticisms of the book was the lack of individual stories. I am sure that in your work and your interaction with your partners, and that you could tell us some good stories about girls who have been able to go to school, and then some negative stories about girls that were prevented from going to school because of their reproductive situation. Can you speak to that?
Sorry, there's a bit of background noise. We do not have power, so the only power available is here in the restaurant. I'm sorry for that. So yes, I can speak a lot about Sierra Leone, because whether we have seen the ban, it being in place, being lifted, and now girls going back to school. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same here for Tanzania, because the ban is still in place, unfortunately. And therefore, we know very many girls are missing out in education, because the moment they get pregnant, or they are seen to be visibly pregnant, they are basically being told to leave the school because, quote unquote, they are influencing the other girls, which is really not the case, because a lot of these girls are not in consensual sexual relationships. They are in exploitative relationships where an adult has taken advantage of them. And of course, they cannot say anything because of the power balance. They do not have the voice to speak, because everybody sees them as the evil one, the bad one. So it's very unfortunate. For those who've managed to come back to school, we've seen in Sierra Leone, but it has only been almost now like 3 years since the ban was lifted. So a very short time to really talk about tangible fruits. But what we've seen is that for schools, we've been training the school management groups so that when these girls come back, they're able to receive them and give them the necessary support. We've seen some very sad situations where a girl comes back with a child and there's no place, there's no baby care for this child, and her mates are in class, and she's not able to attend class because she's breastfeeding this child at break time. So situations that we are calling upon the African governments to really think about this and step up in terms of, even within the schools, have people who are able to take care of these babies when this girl is in school, or if it is at home, provide a situation where this girl can still feel like she's a child, despite the fact that she has given birth, because basically these children are they're missing out their childhood, to be honest. They're becoming parents when they're not ready for that. And Yeah, the few that have gone back to school, yeah, of course, they've gone back, but you can see still the trauma in their faces, the stigma amongst their peers, them being called girl mothers and all that. But what we are trying to do is to create a change within the school environment where people see these girls as survivors, not as evil or criminal girls who ended up getting pregnant, because previously that's what we are feeling and what we are seeing on the ground, with people thinking that they will influence the other girls who are not yet pregnant. Yeah, so that's what I can say for now, and thank you.
No, thank you. That's informative and just an example of how you can change the law, but it still takes implementation, right? And follow-up programs to then, like you said, assist those girl mothers. You know, are there resources for them to for people to help take care of their babies while they're in class, to have facilities for breastfeeding, for all of that. So and it sounds like that's part of the broader, bigger picture that you guys are also addressing, not just changing the laws, but then changing hearts and minds, and then the practical aspects, right? And you know, what's the solution in terms of because all of this costs money too, right? So how is that addressed? How do you combat that?
So for us, the solution is the multi-sectoral approach, where we are bringing together all government departments, both the law enforcement, but also social protection, because a lot of these girls need social protection, nutrition for their young babies, and also security in terms of the communities where they come from. So where if they identify the perpetrator and the perpetrator is arrested, they sometimes face security risks. So also bringing the security team for them to ensure that this girl is safe, despite the fact that she has testified and said, identify the person who violated them. So it's a whole society approach that we are pushing for. And that's why we are calling it multi-sectoral, because it brings everybody on board, including the girl herself. Yeah. So
going back to, I see in the chat too, some questions about raising awareness within the communities themselves, that it was kind of surprising to read about some of the opposition from women. You tend to think that women would understand and be on board, but some of the opposition comes to changes in these laws and changes in practices does come from the women. So what's the educational component, the awareness component? The author, the minister, talks about empathy. How do you convince people that it's the right thing to do?
You know, when the patriarchy cuts across, and if you are a woman and you are brought up in a patriarchal environment, you will pick up those beliefs unless they are challenged. So I wouldn't say that I will blame the women maybe are supporting that aspect. Is because of the environment and the system where they've grown up, what they've known to be the normal. And what we are doing is that we are targeting everybody. In cases where the girl has both mother and father, we are targeting both. But in most cases, these girls are with one parent, so we are targeting that as well. And the communities itself, so that they understand the importance of protecting the rights of this girl, and also ensuring that the girl is not treated in a discriminative way, both in the community, but also in the school environment, bringing together the school management committee. So it is not easy. It is not a one-day job. I can't say that, but it is a work that with concerted effort, we've managed to change social norms. I remember there's a journalist who actually confessed in one of our meetings that she used to see these girls as evil, but after engaging with her, she came to appreciate the challenges that these girls have gone through to become where they are. So step by step, we are changing the communities, especially in Sierra Leone, where we've worked for quite a while. We've just started working in Tanzania the other day, so we still have a lot of work to do.
Interesting point about the journalist. I think the author from Radical Inclusion also talked about some of the people who were the biggest opponents once they became convinced about and just looked at things from a different standpoint, from the views of from the standpoint of the girls, from the protection of the girls, that they were victims themselves, as you said. That once they became convinced, they were actually the best proponents. They were the best at countering the arguments and advocating for the girls in these situations. So I hope that journalist has continued to support the advancement of these ideas and these changes. What gives you hope looking forward, working in Tanzania, but beyond Tanzania, in other areas, and in where you're working? So much of the work that you do involves violence against women. I mean, and I applaud you for the work that you're doing, and your passion and your zeal for doing this for as long as you have. What gives you hope to continue this?
For me, what gives me hope is the little steps we make. For example, in Sierra Leone, when we filed the case, we didn't know that the judges will agree that we are right and that this girl should go back to school. We were pushing forward and quoting the international instruments, the regional instruments, while the national law was against the girls. But this came through, and we girls are now coming back to school, and the government is inviting us to discussions. So for that tells us that the efforts we make bear fruits, and we also know that the efforts we're making here in Tanzania will bear fruits, because we are seeing some positivity from the government asking us, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And then we are able to share what has happened and has worked somewhere else, and they're able to adopt that. So for that, really keeps us going and helps us really to maintain the momentum. And for Sierra Leone, we've really seen also the government going backward and addressing the root causes of the violation. So really that is encouraging to ensure that other girls will not fall victims to this again. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And honestly, that gives us hope as well, and encourages us in our work in supporting you and Equality Now in going after these root causes, these the underlying reasons why girls are getting pregnant, and then if they do, to be able to continue with their education, which we know benefits not just them, not just their kids and their families, but society as large. Anything else you want to tell us before we get into some of the questions from some of our people today?
Thank you, Andy. For me, what I just want to say is that the small efforts we are making, and not only us, but even our networks, because sometimes we issue alerts and we issue petitions for people to sign on. And when they sign on and a minister receives like 100 emails, it shows them that there are people supporting these girls and they're able to act. So that's what I will call upon, that when we send out our alerts, just sign on to them if you are able to, and then they're able to send a message to the person who is supposed to act. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And that was one of our questions, is what can we do? So there's a small thing, raising awareness, signing on to things like that. I encourage everybody to follow Equality Now on social media. Jean Paul is also on social media. I'm following you now. And of course to follow Together Women Rise. And we post about our grantee partners and the work that they're doing around the world. And you can join us in supporting them by following and liking those posts. Wendy, what questions do we have from our members who are joining us today before we go into our small breakout groups here?
So several people are asking about what happens after the girls are allowed to go to school, when they return to school, what stigmas do they experience, and is there any support or safety nets put in place to support these girls when they go back to school?
Yeah, so what happens is that there's really need a lot of support for the girls. You can imagine this is a girl, and in most cases they come back to school after 6 months of delivery, of giving birth. So you can imagine the child is still an infant and the girl is still lactating. So there's a lot of understanding that needs to come from the teachers first, to understand this girl as a victim, as a survivor, and not as a bad girl as they were seen previous. So that's one. So that's why we engage a lot with the school management committee, that if this girl, sometimes she might come late, we are not excusing, but then we are saying that understand the context from which she's coming. And when they understand that, they're able to provide the support. We are pushing for governments to have guidelines and policies to support these girls, but that's yet to be fruitful. So then for now, we are focusing on the school, and with our partner, when we get some sub-grants, we give them for them to continue engaging the school heads, so that they understand these girls, and whenever they encounter a challenge, they're able to help them. In some cases, it is a nutrition for even their babies and even for themselves. You can imagine you are a young girl, you are lactating, so nutrition is really key. And these are something that are normally not provided in schools. But then for these girls, we emphasize that this needs to be provided. Immunization advice for their children, this needs to happen, because, you know, if the child is not well, basically this girl is not well, she will never concentrate in the school. So ensuring that both her and her baby are really well taken care of is a key issue for us. For government to take over that responsibility, but also for us in the meantime to ensure that who are supposed to fulfill it are able to fulfill it. Yeah.
Can you also talk a little bit more about how the importance of it and how you work with parents or family members of the pregnant girls?
Yeah, so with parents, we have something we call the school management committee, and it includes the teachers, the administration of the school, and the parents. And in that committee is where we map out and say, okay, in this year, probably the school has noticed a number of those girls probably not performing well. And then they sit down and find out what is the context at home in terms of the environment. Is it environment conducive for them to learn, or they take care of their children throughout and therefore they're not able to have time for even their own homework? So those are some of the engagements with the parents. The other engagement is just to avoid them being married early, because in most cases, marriage is seen as a solution to them. So we discourage the parents from marrying them early, because we believe that when you postpone the age of marriage, you empower this girl, and she'll be able to make that decision herself when she's able to. Yeah.
Have you been able to track and gather data on outcomes in other countries where the laws were overturned? Do you have some history now in some countries where it's been some time since the law was overturned, and what have you found?
Yes, I mean, for Sierra Leone is now over 3 years, and we've worked there and we've seen what is happening. Despite the challenges that some schools still do not openly accept girls who are either pregnant or who have had babies, because most cases is that after a girl has had a baby, she might not go back to the same school because of stigma. So we opt for a second school, and some schools might refuse, but then with engagement, we've seen them accepting and understanding. And of course, now with the law, they know that if they deny that girl access, they are committing an offense. So then they're able to bring them in. But it is not an easy work. It is something that we've been doing for quite a while. And that's why we're able to have this success, where you even have a school accepting a girl until a doctor says that she's able to give birth. She has reached towards probably the last trimester, then she goes without being discriminated, as opposed to other cases where the moment it is detected, she's expelled.
What will it take culturally, beyond just changing the laws, to advocate for ending teen pregnancies?
Well, culturally, I think it will take the law itself to hold people accountable, those who make girls have sex with young girls, for them to be held accountable. Because if we don't hold them accountable, I mean, it will be a culture of impunity. It is a culture as well, but it's an impunity. So that is one, holding them accountable. The other one is ensuring that these girls are empowered, so that, for example, they will not be exploited sexually for things like a pen, a book, a meal. If we are able to provide that, and that's what we are advocating for in Sierra Leone and Tanzania, that government should be able to provide this. We have what we call the free schools meal program, so that girls are not exploited for the basic necessities of life. And it is not their fault that they don't have those necessities. It's just the economic situation. So if government is able to take up those responsibilities, we think fewer girls will fall into that trap. And therefore, in the long run, no girl will fall into the trap of exploitation, because we've seen cases of girls being exploited for even things like sanitary towels, which is really sad. Yeah.
Yeah, just an observation, because we did see this in Malawi and know of it happening in other places as well, where girls are running late to get to school because they're the ones that are stuck doing the house chores before they go to school, because that's part of their responsibility as the girls in the family. And so as they're trying to get to school, and there aren't routine school buses, there some remote areas, so they're offered rides by the motorcycle guys, but in exchange for sexual favors, to then get to school. And so or as you were saying, Jean Paul, in exchange for sanitary supplies for menstruation, they are expected to give sexual favors. And so part of it is going, as you said, trying to make sure that those girls have the essentials, so that they're not forced into those exploitative situations.
Just a couple more questions. Question about how is contraception offered in the schools and communities? How widespread is that?
In the school and community, it is a big challenge because a lot of the government still have a conservative view on contraceptives. As I mentioned to you, some countries still have a reservation on Article 14 of the Maputo Protocol, which provides for support to survivors of sexual violence and allow safe abortion in cases of rape, incest, and sexual violence. In schools, we have age-appropriate policies for age-appropriate provision of youth clinics, but then some of these girls are violated or even when they are 12, 13. And in some policies, policies provide for higher age for them to access some of these services. And of course, the services are also not widespread within the community. So within schools, I would say no, unfortunately. But then outside school is when they will be able to access the clinics. But you see that will be also very late. Within school, what happens is what we call comprehensive sexuality education. And that one is more of information. Where can you find this and that? But if you look at the whole ecosystem of accessing contraceptives, especially in the African context where sex is still being viewed in a very conservative culture. Even this girl going to a clinic and tomorrow the clinic person tells the parent that your daughter or your son came for this and that. You can imagine what. So there is a lot of barriers, but those are some of the things we're trying to address with the legal advocacy so that if there's a law providing that this is available to children from this age and it is safe for them, then of course everybody will have to obey that and move with that. And we think that can really help to protect these girls and their future as well.
And the last question that I'll pose and then we'll wrap up this section is there a way to educate the men and boys about this?
I'm a man. Personally, as a man, I think accountability has been working for men. If they know someone who exploited a girl and they've been held accountable, that really works as a deterrence tool. For boys, they are engaged through the school clubs where they are also basically taught very simple thing that you don't have a right to violate a girl. There's no such a right. And also girls, in the event that you are violated, there's a recourse. There's a referral pathway that you can get justice, you can get support. But I don't think it is the duty of girls to educate the boys. The boys need to be educated by the society and the government for them to respect the rights of girls in a society and in a school, in a community. Yeah.
That's all the questions that we have, Vicki.
That's great. Jean Paul, you are my hero. I'm so glad that we were able to reestablish the connection for the short time that we did have. It flew by. I would love to talk to you further. I'm cheering you on. We're all cheering you on in the work that you're doing, and we're proud to partner with you and with Equality Now for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.